The open road had always been my sanctuary. There's something calming about the hum of the tires against the asphalt, the endless stretch of highway, and the solitude of driving alone in the dead of night. But after what I went through last week, I'll never feel safe on the road again. You see, I'm a trucker, and what happened to me isn't something I can just forget. It was a route I had driven 100 times before, a straight shot from Pennsylvania to Texas. I was hauling a load of heavy machinery, and with the deadline tight, I didn't have the luxury of taking too many breaks. So I pushed on, eyes fixed on the road, coffee in hand, and the occasional radio static to keep me company. Somewhere in Arkansas, a storm rolled in. You could see the sky bruise black for miles before it hit. The rain came down in sheets, reducing visibility to nothing but a blur of red taillights ahead. That's when I saw him. At first, it was just a glimpse, a figure standing on the side of the road, drenched and motionless. Now you've got to understand, it's not uncommon to see hitchhikers out there. But something about this guy felt off. His clothes clung to him like they were soaked through, his head hung low, and even in the rain, I could make out his strange posture. I didn't stop. Something in my gut told me to keep driving. A few miles later, the rain picked up, and I started to relax, thinking I'd just imagined the whole thing. But then, out of nowhere, a loud thud echoed from the back of the trailer. Like something, or someone, had slammed into it. I jolted forward, gripping the wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. I pulled off at the next truck stop. My nerves were shot, and I needed to check the load, just in case. As I climbed out into the rain, the headlights flickered on and off, almost like they were struggling to stay alive. That's when I saw them again. Footprints, muddy and fresh, leading from the side of the trailer toward the woods. I thought maybe it was some animal, maybe a deer or something, but then I noticed the prints were human. Barefoot. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up as I followed the trail around to the back of the truck. That's when I saw the lock. It was hanging off the door, twisted and broken, like someone had pried it open. My heart was in my throat. I swung open the trailer doors, flashlight in hand, sweeping it across the dark interior. The machinery was still there, untouched. But in the far corner, the beam of my light caught something, a wet smear of mud on the floor. I stepped closer, dreading what I might find. Before I could make sense of it, I heard the faintest shuffle from behind me. My blood ran cold. I whipped around, but there was nothing. Just the rain. Just the night. I must have imagined it, I thought. I was on edge, too much caffeine, not enough sleep. That's all. I locked the trailer back up, tighter this time, and got back on the road. For the next few hours, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. Every now and then, I'd catch something moving in the side mirrors, but when I looked, it was gone. Shadows darting across the highway, shapes flickering in the distance, like someone was following me, just out of sight. Then, it got worse. I was somewhere in the middle of nowhere, one of those stretches where the only thing between you and the next town is 50 miles of dark, empty road, when the CB radio crackled to life. But there were no voices. Just static. Then a single word, whispered so softly I almost missed it. Stop. I froze. My eyes scanned the road ahead, my hands trembling on the wheel. The voice came again, louder this time, but still distant, like it was coming from inside the cab. Stop. I slammed on the brakes. The truck screeched to a halt, skidding slightly on the wet road. My heart was racing, pounding in my ears. I turned off the engine, sat there in the silence, and waited. Nothing. Just the sound of the rain. I didn't know what to do. Should I call someone? But who? The police? What would I tell them? That I was hearing voices over the radio, that someone was following me? I was about to start the engine again when I heard it, a tapping sound. Light at first, almost rhythmic, like someone gently knocking on a door. It was coming from the side of the cab. I slowly turned my head toward the window, dreading what I might see. Through the fogged-up glass, I could just make out the outline of a figure standing there, its face inches from the window. My breath caught in my throat as the figure raised its hand and began scratching at the glass, long thin fingers dragging slowly down the surface, leaving streaks in the condensation. I floored it. I didn't care who or what that was, I wasn't sticking around to find out. For the next hour, I drove as fast as I could, my eyes darting between the road and the mirrors, half expecting to see that thing chasing after me. But the road was empty. I kept driving until I reached a town, any town, and pulled into a well-lit parking lot near a diner. I wasn't going any further that night. I don't know who or what I saw on that highway, but one thing's for sure, I'm never driving that route again. Some things aren't meant to be understood. They just are. And sometimes, it's better to keep moving, no matter what you hear, no matter what you see. Because out there, in the darkness, not everything wants to stay forgotten. I sat in the parking lot for what felt like hours, staring at the rain pelting the windshield, my heart still racing. The diner's neon sign flickered, casting an eerie glow across the lot, and the faint hum of the building's lights was the only sound cutting through the storm. I needed to go inside, grab some food, clear my head, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. It was like the cab was suffocating me. Every breath felt heavier, and I could still hear that whisper from the radio, that faint stop. I kept replaying the moment in my mind, that figure standing outside my truck, dragging those fingers down the glass. What the hell had I seen? I finally forced myself to move, pushing open the door and stepping out into the cold rain. The diner was mostly empty when I walked in, just a few truckers hunched over their plates, eyes glazed from hours on the road. I took a seat at the counter, hoping the warmth and noise of the place would ground me. The waitress, an older woman with tired eyes and a name tag that read Marla, shuffled over to me. "Rough night, hon?" she asked, her voice carrying that worn-out kindness that comes from seeing too many people pass through and not sticking around long enough to care. "Yeah, you could say that," I muttered, not really wanting to get into it. I ordered some coffee and a sandwich, needing something, anything, to shake off the lingering dread. As I sat there, trying to act normal, my eyes kept wandering to the window. I couldn't help it. The diner was situated right next to the highway, and every time a pair of headlights flashed by, I tensed, half expecting to see that figure again, standing on the side of the road watching, waiting. But nothing happened. The waitress set my coffee down in front of me, and I took a long sip, hoping the heat would calm my nerves. I tried to focus on the mundane, on the noise of plates clattering in the kitchen, the murmur of the other truckers, the faint drone of the TV playing in the corner. But then, the radio. The one mounted behind the counter. It crackled to life, just like mine had back in the truck. At first, it was just static, but then came the whisper. "Stop." I froze, my heart lurching in my chest. I looked around, trying to see if anyone else had heard it, but the few other people in the diner were oblivious, too caught up in their meals or their phones. But I heard it clear as day, that same voice, that same word. "Stop." It was louder now, more insistent. I stood up, knocking over my coffee in the process. Marla gave me a startled look, wiping her hands on her apron. "You okay, hon?" I didn't answer. I was already heading for the door, my hands shaking as I fumbled with my wallet to throw some cash on the counter. I had to get out of there. I had to get away from that voice, away from whatever the hell was happening. But as I stepped outside, the rain suddenly stopped. I mean, dead silent. 1 minute, it was pouring, and the next, it was like someone had flipped a switch. The air felt thick, heavy, like I was standing in the eye of a storm. I looked up and down the road, and for the first time since I'd pulled into that town, there wasn't a single car in sight. That's when I saw him again. Standing just at the edge of the parking lot, barely illuminated by the diner's neon glow, was the figure. His posture was the same as before, head low, arms hanging unnaturally at his sides. But this time, he was closer, close enough that I could see the details I hadn't noticed before. His clothes were torn, hanging off his frame in wet, shredded pieces, and his skin. His skin was pale, almost translucent, like he hadn't seen daylight in years. And his eyes. God, his eyes were wide, unblinking, staring straight at me. "Stop." The voice came again, this time inside my head. It wasn't the radio. It wasn't the diner's speaker. It was coming from him. My legs felt like they were made of lead, every instinct screaming at me to run, to get the hell out of there, but I couldn't move. Then, he took a step forward. And another. And another. My body finally kicked into gear. I bolted to the truck, not daring to look back. I could feel him behind me though. I could feel those eyes burning into my back. I yanked the door open, scrambled inside, and jammed the key into the ignition. The engine roared to life, and I floored it, speeding out of the parking lot and onto the highway. I didn't stop driving for hours. It wasn't until I was halfway across the state line into Texas that I finally pulled over at another rest stop, my hands still trembling on the wheel. I sat there for a long time, trying to catch my breath, trying to make sense of what had just happened. That's when I saw it, another set of muddy footprints, leading from the back of the trailer. I haven't told anyone else about this, not until now. Maybe I'm losing it. Maybe it was the exhaustion, the long hours, the isolation of the road. But I know what I saw. And I know deep down that whatever or whoever that thing was, it's still out there. I spent the next few days trying to push the whole thing out of my mind. I told myself I was just overworked, overtired, maybe even hallucinating. Long-haul trucking can mess with your head if you're not careful. Lack of sleep, too much caffeine, and endless hours of darkness will do that to you. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't forget about that figure. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those pale, lifeless eyes staring back at me, those wet, shredded clothes clinging to his ghostly frame. The next haul took me from Texas up to Wyoming. It was a long stretch, and I was determined to make it without incident. This time, I stuck to the daylight, no more driving through the dead of night. If I got tired, I pulled over. If it rained, I slowed down. I even started to avoid the backroads, sticking to major highways and well-lit rest stops. I figured as long as I played it safe, I could outrun whatever had happened that night. For a while, it worked. The first couple of days went smoothly, almost too smoothly. But on the third day, as I was passing through a remote part of Nebraska, the weather took a sudden turn. One minute, it was sunny and clear, the next, a thick fog rolled in out of nowhere. I couldn't see more than a few feet in front of me, the headlights barely cutting through the mist. I slowed the truck to a crawl, leaning forward in my seat, trying to make out the road ahead. The fog was so dense, it felt like I was driving through a dream, everything around me muted, distant, unreal. The radio had gone static again, the only sound in the cab the soft rumble of the engine and the rhythmic squeak of the wipers against the windshield. That's when I saw it. At first, it was just a flicker, something moving in the fog, barely visible through the haze. I told myself it was just my imagination, just another trick of the mind, but then it appeared again. Closer this time. A figure. Standing in the middle of the road. I slammed on the brakes, the truck skidding slightly on the wet pavement. My heart was in my throat as the figure came into focus, stepping slowly toward the truck, its movements jerky, unnatural. I could barely make out the details through the fog, but I knew, it was him. The same figure from the side of the road that night in Arkansas. I gripped the wheel so tight my knuckles turned white, every instinct screaming at me to hit the gas, to get the hell out of there. But something held me in place. Some invisible force kept me frozen, watching as the figure got closer and closer. Then, just like before, the radio crackled to life. Stop. The voice was louder now, more insistent, echoing in my head like a command I couldn't ignore. Stop. My chest tightened, the air in the cab growing thick and suffocating. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. All I could do was stare as the figure reached the front of the truck, his face still obscured by the fog, his eyes just dark shadows beneath the hood of his tattered clothes. I don't know what came over me, but in that moment, I did the only thing I could think of. I honked the horn, blasting it long and hard, hoping to scare him off, hoping to snap myself out of this nightmare. But the figure didn't flinch. Instead, he placed one hand on the hood of the truck, his fingers pressing into the metal like they were sinking right through it. I watched in horror as the fog around him seemed to thicken, swirling in strange patterns, twisting around his body like something alive. His head slowly lifted, and for the first time, I saw his face. Or what was left of it. The skin was pale, almost translucent, stretched tight over sharp, bony features. His eyes, oh God, his eyes, were hollow empty sockets, black and endless, like looking into the void. And his mouth was twisted into a grin that didn't belong on any human face. Stop, he whispered again, though his lips didn't move. That was enough for me. Whatever was happening, whatever that thing was, I wasn't sticking around to find out. I slammed my foot on the gas, the tires screeching as the truck lurched forward. For a split second, I braced myself for impact, expecting to feel the sickening thud of the figure hitting the hood. But there was nothing. The truck barreled forward, the fog parting around me, and when I glanced in the rearview mirror, the figure was gone. Just like that. Vanished into the mist as if he'd never been there at all. I didn't stop driving for hours. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely keep them on the wheel, but I didn't dare pull over. Not until I was well beyond the fog, well beyond whatever it was that had been following me. When I finally stopped, it was at a truck stop on the outskirts of Cheyenne. I parked in the far corner of the lot, keeping the cab lights on, keeping the engine running, as if that would somehow keep me safe. But I knew deep down, it wasn't over. That figure, that thing, it wasn't gone. It had followed me once, and it would follow me again. I didn't know when or where, but I knew it was out there waiting. Watching. And next time, I might not be so lucky. I spent the next few days in a state of constant paranoia, jumping at every shadow, flinching at every unfamiliar sound. The image of that figure, with its hollow eyes and twisted grin, haunted me. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw it staring back at me. The truck stops, the long stretches of highway, the isolation, it all felt like a trap, like I was being led somewhere I couldn't escape. But I had to keep moving. It's not like I could just quit. The road was my livelihood, and the longer I stayed still, the more vulnerable I felt. So I took another haul, this time headed west toward Nevada. It was a longer route than I would have liked, but it kept me busy, kept my mind off things. For the first few days, nothing happened. The sky was clear, the weather perfect, and I started to think maybe I'd shaken whatever had been following me. Maybe it was just a weird, terrifying encounter, and now it was over. But, of course, that was just wishful thinking. It was the fourth night of the trip. I was somewhere in Utah, driving down a desolate stretch of highway that cut through the desert like a scar. There were no towns for miles, no other vehicles on the road. Just me, the truck, and the endless black sky above. That's when the headlights started flickering. It was subtle at first, just a brief flicker, like a power surge. I figured it was nothing, a loose connection or maybe a bug in the electrical system. But then it happened again, longer this time, the light dimming until I was almost driving blind. I slowed the truck, my heart picking up speed. I couldn't see much beyond the hood now, just the vague shapes of the desert on either side of me. But then I saw it, something moving in the distance. It was far off, just a dark speck against the horizon, but it was moving fast, too fast. My first thought was that it was another car, finally someone else on this godforsaken road, but as it got closer, I realized it wasn't a car.
It was a person.
No.
It was him.
I gripped the wheel, my breath catching in my throat. He was running toward me. No, not running, gliding. His feet barely touched the ground, his body moving unnaturally fast, his limbs jerking and twisting in impossible ways. And those eyes, those hollow black eyes, were locked on me. I slammed on the gas, the truck roaring as it surged forward, but no matter how fast I went, he kept getting closer. It was like he was being pulled toward me, like the space between us didn't matter. The radio crackled to life again, the static filling the cab, and then that voice, his voice, echoed through the speakers.
Stop.
It wasn't a request.
It was a command.
I sped up, heart pounding in my ears, the road blurring beneath me. The figure was nearly at the side of the truck now, his body distorted and wrong, like he was moving in fast forward while everything else stayed normal. He reached out, his fingers stretching toward the side mirror, his face twisted in that same grotesque grin. Then, the headlights cut out completely. I was plunged into darkness, the truck skidding wildly as I fought to keep control. I couldn't see anything, not the road, not the desert, not him. Just the sound of the engine roaring beneath me and my own ragged breathing. But I knew he was there.
I could feel him.
Suddenly, there was a loud bang, like something heavy had slammed into the side of the truck. The whole rig shuddered, and I almost lost control. I yanked the wheel hard to the right, sending the truck swerving onto the shoulder. The tires kicked up gravel, and I finally brought it to a stop. I sat there, my hands shaking on the wheel, trying to catch my breath. The headlights flickered back on, dim at first, then brightening to full strength. I looked around, half expecting to see him standing right in front of me, but the road was empty. I didn't wait to find out what had happened. I threw the truck into gear and took off again, my foot pressed hard on the gas, not caring where I was going as long as it was away from there. For the rest of the night, I didn't stop.
Not once.
I kept my eyes on the road, scanning the horizon for any sign of movement, for any hint that he was still following me. But there was nothing. Just the empty desert stretching out endlessly in all directions. Eventually, I pulled into a small truck stop on the outskirts of a town whose name I can't even remember. The sun was starting to rise, casting an eerie orange glow over the landscape, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I let myself breathe. I parked the truck in a corner of the lot, away from everyone else, and got out to inspect the damage. The side of the trailer had a long, deep scratch running along it, like something had clawed at it as I drove. I ran my fingers over the grooves, my skin crawling.
I didn't sleep that night.
I didn't even try. Instead, I sat in the driver's seat, staring out at the empty road, waiting for the sun to chase away the shadows. But even in the daylight, I knew it wasn't over. I could still feel him, out there watching, waiting. And the next time, I wasn't sure I'd be able to outrun him. I didn't stay long at that truck stop. By the time the sun had fully risen, the sense of dread had settled so deeply in my gut that I knew I had to keep moving. It didn't matter how far or fast I drove though. I could feel it in my bones. He was still out there, waiting for me to slip up, to stop just long enough for him to catch up. For the next few days, I stuck to my routine. I drove during the day, kept to major highways, and avoided nighttime hauls like the plague. I tried to keep my head down, tried to convince myself that if I just followed the rules, I could finish this run and get back home in one piece. But every time the sun started to dip below the horizon, I'd pull off the road and find the brightest, busiest place I could park for the night.
It worked for a while.
Days turned into a blur of asphalt, truck stops and sleepless nights spent huddled in the cab, trying not to let my mind drift back to that thing, that man, who had been chasing me. I tried to focus on the job, on the next delivery, the next stop. But even in broad daylight, I'd catch glimpses of him, just out of the corner of my eye. A shadow standing at the edge of a parking lot, a figure walking along the road in my rearview mirror, disappearing the moment I blinked. By the time I reached Nevada, I was running on fumes. Physically, mentally, emotionally, everything in me was drained. I hadn't slept more than a couple of hours at a time in days, and the paranoia had taken root so deep, I couldn't tell what was real anymore. That's when things got worse. I'd been pushing through the last stretch of highway, a long, lonely road cutting through miles of nothingness. The desert stretched out on both sides, the horizon blurred by the heat rising off the asphalt. It was midday, the sun blazing high overhead, and I was struggling to keep my eyes open. I was exhausted, but I didn't dare stop.
Not out here.
Not where there was no one around to see what might happen. I was halfway through the stretch when I noticed something up ahead. At first, it was just a dark smudge on the horizon, a speck that I thought was maybe a broken-down car or some other driver pulled over on the shoulder. As I got closer, though, I realized it wasn't a car.
It was a person.
Standing in the middle of the road. My heart lurched, my foot instinctively hovering over the brake.
No. It couldn't be. Not here. Not in broad daylight. But it was.
I knew it before I even saw his face. The way he stood there, motionless, waiting, his head slightly tilted to the side like he was listening for something only he could hear. The sun beat down on him, casting long dark shadows that seemed to twist and writhe around his feet like smoke. His clothes were the same, tattered, wet, clinging to his emaciated frame, and those eyes. Those eyes were fixed on me. My body reacted before my mind could. I swerved hard to the right, veering off the road and onto the dirt shoulder. The truck jolted violently, tires skidding over loose gravel as I fought to regain control. Dust kicked up around me, and for a moment, I lost sight of him, the road disappearing in the cloud of dirt and debris. When I finally brought the truck to a stop, heart hammering in my chest, I looked back toward the road.
He was gone.
I sat there for a long moment, my hands gripping the wheel so tight my knuckles had turned white. I half expected him to reappear, closer this time, maybe right next to the truck, his face pressed up against the glass. But the road was empty. Just the heat shimmering off the asphalt and the wind whispering through the desert. I let out a shaky breath, trying to calm myself down.
It's not real, I told myself. It's just the stress.
Just the exhaustion. You're seeing things. But deep down, I knew it wasn't true.
He was real.
And he wasn't done with me yet. I pulled back onto the road, driving slower now, my eyes flicking nervously between the mirrors and the horizon. The rest of the drive was agonizing, every mile stretching out longer than the last. I couldn't shake the feeling that he was still out there, following me, waiting for the right moment to strike. When I finally reached my destination, I was on the verge of collapse. I handed off the load, exchanged a few half-hearted pleasantries with a warehouse crew, then immediately headed to a nearby motel. I needed sleep, real sleep in a bed, with a locked door between me and whatever the hell was out there. The room was cheap and rundown, but I didn't care. I locked the door, bolted it, then pushed a chair up against the handle for good measure. The window rattled slightly in the frame, but the blinds were thick enough to keep out most of the light. I threw my duffel bag in the corner, kicked off my boots, and collapsed onto the bed. For the first time in days, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe I'd finally outrun him. Maybe this would be the night I'd finally get some peace. I fell asleep almost instantly. But peace wasn't what I found. I woke up in the dead of night to the sound of tapping. Light, rhythmic, like fingernails gently rapping against glass. At first, I thought it was part of a dream, but as I blinked the sleep from my eyes, the sound grew louder.
More insistent.
I sat up, my heart thudding in my chest, and glanced around the dark room. The tapping continued, steady and slow, coming from the window. I didn't want to look. Every instinct in my body screamed at me not to. But I had to. I had to know if it was him. I stood, legs trembling beneath me, and slowly crept toward the window. The tapping grew louder with every step, like whatever was on the other side knew I was coming closer. When I reached the window, I hesitated, my hand hovering over the edge of the blinds. My breath hitched in my throat as I steeled myself for what I might see. Then, with one swift motion, I yanked the blinds open.
He was there.
Standing just outside the window, his face inches from the glass, that same twisted grin stretched across his pale, gaunt face. His fingers, long and bony, tapped rhythmically against the windowpane, leaving faint smudges where his skin touched the glass. His eyes, those hollow black eyes, stared straight into mine. "Stop," he whispered, his voice muffled but clear. I stumbled back, my heart hammering in my chest.
He didn't move.
He just stood there, tapping, smiling, waiting. And in that moment, I realized something. He wasn't going to stop. I don't know how long I stood there, staring into his hollow eyes through that grimy motel window. His fingers kept tapping against the glass, slow, methodical, like he had all the time in the world. The grin on his face never wavered. It was like he was waiting for me to break, to give in, to let him in. "Stop," he whispered again, that word wrapping around my brain like a vice, tightening until I thought my skull might crack. I wanted to run, to scream, to tear myself out of that room and drive until the desert swallowed me whole.